Hello friends. By beginning with the definition of the high temperature, in these series of lectures on high temperature materials, we have been considering the effect of temperature on the properties of the material and also the behavior of the material. In the behavior, we considered the mechanical behavior in the form of the creep, and also we saw in a few lectures earlier the corrosive nature of the material at high temperature, how temperature influences the corrosion, particularly the oxidation of materials. Now, in these few lectures that are left from the previous lecture onwards, we have been considering ways to enhance the creep resistance of the material. Now, when we say creep resistance, we mean to increase the life of the material at high temperature. Okay, I want to reiterate one key term here, that is the material term, meaning materials when we use, we are not talking about all the materials in general, we are largely restricting ourselves to metals and alloys. Now, in the previous lecture, one of the approach to enhance the life of the material which we saw was solid solution strengthening. So, in the previous lecture, our focus was largely on solid solution strengthening. Now, even though this is the way we achieve it, the underpinning theory that enables us to enhance the creep resistance through this approach is by restricting the plastic deformation. So what we are essentially doing is we are restricting the plastic deformation through this solid solution strengthening, particularly at high temperature, and thereby we are enhancing the creep resistance of the material. So if you could recollect, what we are essentially doing is, in this representative curve of creep, even though this particular region is referred to as the steady state condition, and it has the minimal strain rate or creep rate of all the other conditions or all the other stages, it is important to note that there is a marginal amount or a minimal amount of strain that is experienced by the material in this steady state condition. So what we are essentially doing is we are reducing the plastic deformation at a given instant in this steady state condition. So when we reduced the plastic strain, so this is nothing but a stress, or rather a strain versus time plot. And now what we are essentially doing is, at a given instance, we are reducing the amount of plastic strain exhibited by the material in the steady state condition. So that means you are reducing the plastic strain at every instance. So when you are reducing the plastic strain at every instance, essentially you are decreasing the overall creep rate that is exhibited by the material in the steady state condition. Of course, it's the minimal most creep rate, but even though there is a creep rate, and that creep rate you are reducing, so that means essentially the creep enhanced material will have a strain versus time plot of this manner. So we are reducing the plastic deformation at a given instance, thereby we are reducing the creep rate in the steady state condition, and essentially what we are doing is thereby we are enhancing the life of the material. So when you reduce the creep rate, when you reduce the plastic deformation exhibited by the material at a given instance within the steady state condition, what you are essentially doing is you are prolonging the duration the material spends in the steady state condition. And when you are prolonging the duration the material spends in the steady state condition, you are essentially increasing the life of the material in an application, because in an application the predominant amount of time the material spends is in the steady state condition. So this is the theoretical underpinning, and based on this we are postulating different ways, or we are considering different approaches using which we can enhance the life of the material. So one such way is solid solution strengthening, and we saw in the previous lecture that this solid solution strengthening, it restricts the migration of the dislocation. So when you consider plastic strain, it is governed by two parameters, that is the dislocation density and the average distance covered by the dislocations. Now, due to the temperature rearranges the dislocation, thereby forming sub-boundaries, which we refer to as the polygonization, and also there is annihilation. So because of the temperature, this density is already reduced. Now, through solid solution strengthening, we are reducing the average distance covered by the dislocation. So, in the previous lecture, we saw one of the ways we can achieve this reduction in the average distance covered by the dislocation is through elastic interaction. So what this elastic interaction means is that the solute that you are introducing into the material, it creates an elastic distortion, and the dislocation that is causing the plastic deformation, it has implicitly a distortion that is surrounding it, and these two distortions, they interact with each other and thereby ultimately reducing the mobility of the dislocations. So this is how solid solution strengthening primarily achieves or restricts the mobility of the dislocation. And by restricting the mobility of the dislocation, what we mean by that is for a given time, the amount of distance that is traveled by the dislocation is reduced. Therefore, to complete a particular distance and to bring about that amount of plastic deformation, the material needs significant amount of time. So that means you are reducing the rate of plastic deformation or the creep rate, thereby enhancing the overall life of the material. So you are reducing or you are impeding the mobility or the movement of the dislocation. This means to cover a certain distance to bring about an observable plastic deformation, the time taken will be large. So this means the creep rate at this enhanced condition or during solid solution strengthening is low. Thereby you have ultimately enhanced the life of the material. So one way we saw is through elastic interaction, and this is brought about, or the distortion that is caused by the solute is brought about by the difference in the atomic radii. Now we saw if we violate Hume-Rothery's rule, if this rule is violated, then the solubility of course is reduced. However, the distortion is increased. So that means you have sufficiently impeded the mobility of the dislocation. However, if we follow the Hume-Rothery's rule, the solubility is increased and the distortion is rather dispersed. You have a dispersed distortion, and therefore when you compare it with the violated Hume-Rothery condition, the effect of these solutes are reduced. And finally, we have interstitial solid solution. So in this case, there is also you also have either a distortion that is introduced. However, this distortion, when compared to the substitutional solid solution, wherein the atoms, solute atom replace the lattice of the parent atoms or the base metal, in that case the distortion is spherical in nature, and interstitial is non-spherical in nature. However, there is a distortion. So this distortion, again in the context of elastic interaction, impedes the propagation of the dislocation, thereby reducing the rate of plastic deformation or reducing the creep rate, ultimately enhancing the creep resistance and increasing the life of the material. Now, in addition to this particular elastic interaction, there are other ways these solute materials also interact with or enhance the life of the material. So one is these solute atoms, they in some cases change the shear modulus G. So in some materials, these solute atoms that we add, they change the shear modulus, and by changing the shear modulus, of course there will be an influence on the plastic strain in response to the imposed stress condition. However, when we consider the amount of solute that is involved, particularly when you violate Hume-Rothery's rule, and the increase in temperature and the influence of shear on the creep, not just plastic deformation, but we are ultimately interested in creep. So when you consider all these factors, one, the amount of solute that is dissolved. Secondly, influence of shear not on plastic deformation, but directly on creep. The effect of solute through this change in shear modulus is rather limited at high temperature. Even though at ambient temperature, this is one possible way of enhancing, or rather one possible way of restricting the plastic deformation, that is by changing the shear modulus. At high temperature, this doesn't play much of a role for two reasons. One is we are largely interested in the creep. Secondly, we want to have maximum distortion, that is by violating the Hume-Rothery's rule. So therefore, considering these two, the change in the shear modulus does not play much of a role at high temperature. the other ways in which these solid solution or the addition of the solute atoms or inclusion of the solute atoms into the base metal, the other ways in which these solute atoms restrict the propagation of the dislocation is through what we refer to as the electric interaction. So in addition to the elastic interaction, you also have an electric interaction. So what this means is that the electric interaction is introduced when you have a significant amount of disparity in the valency of the atoms. When you have, say, a solute atoms and a solvent atoms, wherein the valency or the valence electrons that each atoms lose and the positive charge they attain, when there is a significant amount of difference in these positive charges, then this difference, it causes an interaction while the dislocations passes through the solute atoms, and these significant difference in the valency, significant difference in the valency also impedes the migration of the dislocations. In the pure metal case, what you have is the atoms of identical valency. So therefore, when they lose the electrons to form the electron cloud, the ions that they form will be of equal or identical positive charges. Now, when you introduce a solute with a significant difference in the valency, that means there is a significant difference in the positive nature of these ions. So positive or the positive charge of these ions. Now, dislocation, considering that it is largely made up of the base metal, and when they come across these solute atoms wherein the positive charges is significantly different, this causes an elastic interaction, and this impedes the propagation of the electron or other dislocations. Now, in addition to the elastic interaction, we have electric interaction and also a change in the shear modulus. However, at high temperature, change in the shear modulus doesn't play much of a role. So you have elastic interaction playing some role and playing a definite role, and also electric interaction playing a definite role. Now finally, one aspect we need to consider is that these dislocations at high temperature, they not only glide but also they climb. So that is one of the characteristic features that is associated with high temperature when considering the mobility or propagation of dislocations. So when you increase the temperature, if you could recollect, in addition for these dislocation, in addition to this gliding movement of the dislocation, gliding meaning the dislocation they traverse in a particular plane, a set plane rather. Now, at high temperature, because of the increase in vacancies, this movement of these vacancies as well, you have this climb of these dislocations, wherein they move from one plane to another. Now, all these interactions, and both elastic and electric, and also to some extent the change in the shear modulus, they largely restrict the glide moment of the dislocation. So therefore, we need a way in which these solute atoms restrict the climb moment of the dislocation. So this is achieved by stacking fault energy. So what we mean by that is, when you introduce a solute atom, and in the presence of the solute atom, if a climb is introduced, generally when you consider a climb event, a climb of a dislocation, what it means, or this climb event can be translated as the introduction of stacking fault in a particular set of planes. So of course, the introduction or the nucleation of the dislocation can also be viewed as to some degree as the introduction of stacking fault. However, the climb event is the introduction of stacking fault in a particular set of planes. So you have a dislocation or a stacking fault that is present in a certain set of planes, and when this dislocation climbs from this set of plane to another set of planes, then this movement of the dislocation can be viewed as the introduction of stacking fault in a new set of planes. Now, this introduction of the stacking fault is entirely dependent on this stacking fault energy, the amount of energy that is associated with this formation of the stacking fault. Now, in the presence of the solute atoms, this stacking fault energy significantly increases, because this movement has to accommodate the larger atom in case of substitutional solid solution, or in case of interstitial solid solution. These interstitial atoms that are small when compared to the atoms of the base metal, they occupy the dislocation or the region of the distortion created by the dislocation, thereby pinning the dislocation and avoiding or not allowing it to experience climb. So in order for the material to or the dislocation to experience climb in the presence of the interstitial, you need to break away from this bond. So therefore, in case of substitutional solid solution, the stacking fault or the climb of the dislocation needs to accommodate the larger atoms. So therefore, the stacking fault energy is increased. In case of interstitial solid solution, these interstitial atoms, they pin the dislocation, thereby not allowing it to climb, and again ultimately increasing the stacking fault energy. So both substitutional and interstitial solid solution, they contribute to the increase in the stacking fault energy in their own manner. The interstitial by pinning, while substitutional by restricting, because it should encompass the movement of the larger substitutional atoms, or it should include or bring it together with the bring with it the larger substitutional atoms. So therefore, by both interstitial and substitutional, by increasing the stacking fault energy, the energy required to bring about the stacking fault, they restrict the climb of the dislocations. So these are the ways, in addition to the elastic interaction, by changing the shear modulus, by electric interaction, and by increasing the stacking fault energy, the solid solution, it strengthens or it enhances the creep resistance of the material. So this is one way of enhancing the creep resistance of the material. Again, this way of enhancing the creep resistance is largely based on restricting the mobility of the dislocation. And it is important to note that here the Hume-Rothery rules, it plays a vital role, and because this needs the replacement of atoms in the positioning of the atoms in the base metal lattice and also in the interstitial side, so we need to be very careful about which solute we are choosing. So this is highly dependent on the materials that we use. So through the Hume-Rothery rules, there is a restriction for us in using the solid solution strengthening, and therefore it is highly dependent on the material and it cannot be used for all material. Now the other approach that can be taken in order to enhance the creep resistance of the material is through the introduction of a new phase. Introduction of an additional phase. So instead of having a homogeneous system, homogeneous polycrystalline system like you have in a physical condition, we are introducing certain degree of inhomogeneity, and this degree of inhomogeneity is introduced by adding or including a new phase to the system. So now when we consider translating a single phase system to a two phase system, there are ways in which the second phase can be arranged or they can be positioned. Now whenever we are talking about, say for instance, a two phase system, we will there can be of course there can be three phase, four phase system, multi-phase system. It is of course possible. For the sake of this discussion, let us restrict ourselves to a two phase system. And whenever you are considering a two phase system or want to have a two phase system and you want to study the property of the material in this two phase system, the change in the behavior of the material and the property of the material in case of the two phase system, it is governed by several factors like the size of the second phase that is present, the shape of the second phase that is present. Like these things you could recollect when you have studied, say, spheroidal cast iron or spheroidization of the perlite structure, and how the properties varied when you consider a pure perlite structure and when you spheroidized it, and now the cementite is present in the form of a globule. So this is like some examples that we can relate to. So therefore, when you have a two phase system, the properties is not it's not governed by a single factor, but it's governed by numerous factors. That is the size of the second phase that is present, shape of it, the way it is distributed, and of course also the properties of the second phase in relation to the first phase. So these are some of the features that govern the overall property of the two-phase material. So when you introduce a second phase, there are several parameters that is associated with the second phase that govern the property of the material. So these include size, shape, distribution, and the property of the second phase. So generally what is done in case of this two-phase system is, in a ductile matrix, a brittle phase is introduced. In a ductile matrix, a brittle phase, so brittle phase may render a negative connotation, so rather high strength and a hard phase is introduced as the second phase. So generally in case of a two-phase system, you have a ductile matrix and you have a high strength hard phase that is introduced in order to enhance its properties. And now since the overall properties is dependent on the size, shape, distribution, and the properties, of course, when we consider this particular combination, what we are essentially doing is we are talking about the property of the second phase. So this factor is taken care of by this combination here. So there are other factors that still govern the property of the material, property of the two-phase material, even though by combining ductile matrix and the hard phase, by combining these two phases, even though we have to some degree taken care of the properties of the second phase or the influence of the property of the second phase, we still have other factors to take into consideration, that is size, shape, and distribution. Now depending on these other factors, the two-phase system can be categorized, or the enhancing the strength of the system, including a new phase, will render two different microstructure or two different systems. So one system is, when you consider the enhancing the property of the material through a second phase, one system is the two-phase system wherein the size of the precipitate is equivalent to that of the size of the grains. So it would be of this form. If you consider these grains here, yeah, so if you consider these grains here, so the second phase, which we will highlight in, or we will we will highlight in black, or we will make it solid. So the second phase, the size of it is similar to that of the average grain size. So what it means is that instead of grains being chemically homogeneous as in a single phase system, we have these grains which are associated with one of the two phases. So when you want to enhance the property of the material by the inclusion of a second phase, one possible way in which these second phase can be distributed is when they have a size that is comparable to that of the average grain size and they appear in the form of a grain. So in this case, what is unique is that the homogeneity is disturbed by the second phase in the form of its own grain. So in polycrystalline system, each of these grains are generally, in case of a single phase condition, each of these grains are chemically homogeneous. However, in this case, in this two-phase system, which is characterized by the size of the new phase that is equivalent to the average grain size, and the distribution is also similar to that of the grains, and again the shape is to accommodate with this continuum of the material. In those cases, you have these grains assuming, or these phases assuming their own grains. And now the other way in which these particles, or rather the newly introduced phase, can be accommodated in the base metal is through or as particles, or to be more technical, or as precipitates. So here, when compared to this two-phase system, when the second phase is distributed as, or it is included or accommodated as the particles, they are largely dispersed and they are found both some along the grain boundaries and some within the actual grains. Of course, this all depends on the volume fraction as well. So through the size and shape, you can determine the volume fraction of the particles or the new phase that is present. So when you consider this particular two-phase system, when the second phase is present in the form of the particles, they occupy, or they are largely dispersed, and they occupy both a position within the grain and also along the grain boundaries. So these are the two ways in which the phase can be, or a new phase can be included into the homogeneous system. So what we are essentially doing is we are disrupting the homogeneity of the material by introducing a new phase, and this phase can either form a two-phase microstructure, that is by having a size that is comparable to the average grain size and positioning it as a grain of its own. This newly added phase can establish a two-phase microstructure. So one of the example is the duplex microstructure that you see in steel. So this is a two-phase microstructure, and the characteristic feature is the size of the grains are similar to that of the average grain size, and they are positioning or assuming a shape of the grains. And therefore what you essentially have is not a homogeneous microstructure or a single phase microstructure. The grains are not chemically homogeneous. Here you have grains that are associated with one of the two phases. The other ways in which the second phase can be introduced is as the particles are the precipitate which are dispersed, which are not confined, and these are dispersed both in the grain boundaries and also within the grain. Now let us consider how the two-phase microstructure here, when you have such a condition, the size of the particles are similar to that of the average grain size and they assume a grain of their own. In this condition, how the creep resistance is enhanced. In this condition, there are only two ways in which the creep resistance is enhanced. One is by increasing the interface energy, or rather by increasing the strain energy surrounding the interface. What I mean by that is, you have in this condition, in this two-phase microstructure, you have, in addition to grain boundaries, you have boundaries that separate two different phases. So in addition to the grain boundaries that exclusively separates the homogeneous grains of different crystallographic orientations, we have interfaces or boundaries that separates two different phases. For instance, these boundaries here, they separate two different phases. The one highlighted in red, they separate two different phases, and of course one here as well. Now what this means is that in addition to the crystallographic orientation, there is also other factors that governs the energy along these interfaces. So one of these factors are there might be significant difference in the crystal structure. So one example is you can consider the duplex microstructure, that is a microstructure that is formed by the combination of austenite and martensite. You have significant difference in the crystal structure and chemical composition as well. So when you have a significant difference in the crystal structure and the chemical composition, there is a considerable amount of strain energy that is accumulated along these boundaries that separate these two different phases. When you have boundaries that separate these two different phases and you have considerable amount of strain energy that is associated with it, because you have a difference in the crystal structure between the two phases it separates, and the chemical composition also is significantly different, then there will be a significant amount of elastic interaction when the dislocation meets these phases. Now of course, grain boundary, they act as the barrier for the moment of dislocations. However, when these dislocations reach these different these interfaces that separate the two different phases, then the interaction is quite huge, and therefore in this way the introduction of the new phase impedes the propagation of the dislocation. So one way of these dislocation being impeded by the two-phase system is by increasing the strain energy accumulated in the interface that separates the two phases. And therefore, principally it is the elastic interaction again that restricts the mobility of the dislocation, and this elastic interaction now is not brought about by the distortion, but it is brought about by the accumulated strain energy because of the significant difference in the crystal structure between the two phases and the chemical composition between the two phases. Now the other way is it is similar to the one that we considered earlier, that is when you have a second phase that is occupying a definite position in your polycrystalline setup. That means what you are essentially doing is, it is no longer the base metal, you are essentially creating a new material. So if you have an austenite, homogeneous austenite polycrystalline microstructure, and in that you have grains of martensite that are present, it is no longer austenite microstructure alone. What you have is essentially a duplex microstructure. So essentially you don't have austenite alone, you have a combination of austenite and martensite. So that means the overall property of the material is now changed. So essentially in terms of our discussion, it means the properties like shear modulus significantly changes. So as opposed to the marginal change or non-observable change in case of solid solution strengthening, since by including the second phase, and particularly by including the second phase as separate grains, what we are essentially doing is we are creating a new material and they come with their own set of properties, and by these own set of properties we have an enhanced creep resistance. Because of this own set of properties, when you have a significant change in the modulus that governs the plastic strain. Now we are not talking essentially about in terms of the mobility of the dislocation, but we are talking in terms of the change in the property of the material. So inherently, because of the change in the property of the material, we are essentially increasing the creep resistance of the material. So when we talked about the accumulation of strain energy, we are talking in terms of the moment of the dislocation. Now we are moving away from this closer look. We are seeing the material as a whole by introducing the second phase in this form of this phase occupying their own grains, having the size that is relatable to the average grain size. In this form, what we are essentially doing is we are changing the overall setup of the material, we are changing the overall microstructure of the material, and thereby we are introducing or changing significantly the properties, and these properties can be made or tailored in such a way that they enhance the creep resistance of the material. These are the two principal ways in which the second phase, when present in the form of its own grain, when it establishes a two-phase microstructure, a duplex microstructure, in these ways the creep resistance can be enhanced. Now when we move on to the other way, the second arrangement of the second phase, or the other arrangement, the arrangement that is different from the formation of the two-phase microstructure. When we consider this arrangement of the second phase, where they are not so large or their size is not compared to that of the average grain size. When you compare to the average grain size, the size of the second phase or the average size of the second phase is considerably low, and they are dispersed in nature. These or this arrangement of the phase, they influence or they enhance the creep resistance of the material in a different manner. Now it is important for us to note that even in this, by introducing the second phase in the form of the particles, even by doing this, even though we are disrupting the homogeneity of the material, it is not the same way how we do it for the two-phase microstructure. So you have a two-phase microstructure. Here you are confining your disruption to a specific grains. However, here the inhomogeneity is largely dispersed, and therefore the mechanism by which the creep resistance is enhanced when you consider the second phase in the form of the particles is significantly different from the mechanism with which it is enhanced when you have a second phase that is present in the form of a grain of its own. Now when you consider this particular distribution of the particles, when you consider this particular arrangement of the second phase, this can be brought about in two ways. One is this can be brought about through precipitation, and other is this can be brought about through dispersion. Now when we talk about precipitation, what we essentially mean is that in precipitation, let us have the shot from here. So in case of precipitation, what we essentially do is we increase the temperature of the base metal, thereby we increase its solubility to a specific solute. So you increase the temperature of the material and thereby you increase the solubility with a specific solute. And now when you reduce this temperature and in such a way that this particular base metal is supersaturated, so the rate of cooling is ensured, or the rate of cooling is devised in such a way that the supersaturation is achieved. Then if left at this lower temperature, because of this difference in the solubility, the material or second phase begins to precipitate. So in this way, we have the precipitation of the second phase. So what essentially we do in case of the precipitation of the second phase, increase the temperature and increase the solubility of a material to a particular solute, and then we cool it in such a way that, or cool it in such a rate that we achieve a supersaturation of the material with respect to this particular solute. And when we hold the material at that particular temperature, this second phase, which is rich in the solute, begins to precipitate, and this precipitation is in such a way that you have a distribution of these dispersed, or rather these randomly distributed second phase of smaller size. So this is how we achieve this particular distribution in a system with two different phases. So in case of precipitation hardening, what we essentially do is we increase the temperature and increase the solubility, and by reducing the temperature, you decrease the solubility and allow the solute to move away from the base metal and form the precipitate of its own. And this way you achieve an arrangement on the microstructure of this form, wherein you have the precipitate that is distributed within the grain and also along the grain boundaries. Now there is one critical problem with this particular form of having the second phase. This problem is that we are essentially talking about the high temperature behavior of the materials. We are essentially talking about the high temperature applications. The material, this particular material that should be used in the high temperature. Now, when we are constructing, or when we are establishing or devising a microstructure through this precipitation, that is through increasing the temperature and then reducing the temperature, we must be very careful that the high temperature application in which we are introducing this material, or we will be introducing this material, this particular temperature in which the material is operational should be significantly different from the temperature at which this precipitates dissolve, because the whole approach of bringing about this precipitate is by increasing its solubility at high temperature. So when you increase the solubility of this material here, wherein the precipitate is distributed randomly within and along the grain boundaries, now this precipitate, they have been brought about by at low temperature because of the decrease in solubility. Therefore, when you increase the temperature, the solubility also increases. So it is possible for this precipitate to again dissolve back into the base metal. So therefore, when we are using this particular material, this precipitation, this is referred to as the precipitation hardened material. So when we are using this precipitation hardened material at high temperature, we have to be very careful about the operational temperature, because the operational temperature should not allow the reverse solution or reverse dissolution of the precipitate. So the high temperature or the operational temperature should avoid the dissolution of the precipitate. So we have to be very careful to avoid this reverse dissolution of the dissolution of the precipitates that have been introduced through precipitate hardening. So this is one of the primary restriction of introducing the second phase as the precipitate through, or as the particles through precipitate hardening. Meaning the whole concept of precipitate hardening, it works based on the difference in the solubility of the base metals with the difference in temperature. So at high temperature, you have highly soluble base metal. The base metal is highly soluble, so it can accommodate sufficient amount of this solute. At low temperature, the solubility decreases, and therefore it expels the solute that it has gained, and these expelling or this solutes, they accumulate and they form these precipitate. And therefore, when you are planning to use this precipitate hardened two-phase system or this precipitate hardened material at high temperature, we have to be very sure that this temperature that does not allow the dissolution of the precipitate, decrease in the size of the precipitate or number density or whatever the concentration. So it should not disturb the features of the precipitate, and if it gets disturbed, essentially our whole purpose gets spoiled. We will not be able to enhance the life of the material at high temperature. So the precipitate hardened material has this particular disadvantage when it attempts to enhance the high temperature resistance or high temperature life of the material. So alternatively, we have dispersion hardened material. So we have dispersion hardened material. So what difference is that even though both precipitation hardened and dispersion hardened, they render a microstructure that is similar to this. So in both these cases, you have these precipitates that are not as large as the individual grains. They are small and they are distributed and they are dispersed and they are not confined to a specific position. They can be found within the grain, they can be found within along the grain boundaries as well. So even though both precipitation hardened and the dispersion hardened, they render similar microstructure. The way these hardened materials are produced or they brought about, they are significantly different. In case of precipitation hardening, it all depends on the influence of temperature on the solubility of solubility. However, in case of dispersion hardening, what we essentially do is we combine a precipitate and the base metal, which are not at all soluble with one another. So we don't care much about the solubility of these two phases. We introduce them in the form of the powder. So basically, the processing technique largely involves an approach that is close to powder metallurgy, where you bring these two materials that might be soluble, that might not be soluble. So you can make any such combinations. You can bring that and you can process them as you would do in case of the powder metallurgy, wherein a large amount of sintering is involved. And by doing that, you can establish this particular microstructure. So considering that, the dispersion hardening or the ways of bringing about these two phases involves an approach that is close to the powder metallurgy, wherein you physically bring two different materials of different composition together. You process it in such a way that they establish a continuum. So one primary advantage of dispersion hardening is you can so much bring about any combinations of two different phases or two different materials that are possible. So you can bring about, say for instance, you can combine austenite and martensite in this way in any different proportions and thereby establishing a perfect continuum. And you can also replace the martensite with, say for instance, a ceramic material as well. So in principle, this dispersion hardening gives you an enormous or a wide range of two-phase systems that can be established. So you don't have to worry much about the solubility, and this dispersion hardening, it brings about a wide range of this can establish, this particular approach can establish or help us establish a wide range of combinations of a two-phase or a precipitate and a matrix. So this combination, a wide range of combination, can be achieved by the dispersion hardening when compared to the precipitation hardening, which is confined in the sense that it is based on amount of solute that a particular base metal can take in, and how the solubility of that particular base metal varies with the temperature. So when you compare the precipitation hardening with respect to or with the dispersion hardening, the range of the combinations of these two phases that can be brought about is rather limited here, since it is based largely on an approach that is similar to that of powder metallurgy. In principle, at least, theoretically, you can combine any two phases, or wide range of combinations of two phases can be achieved. Secondly, you don't have to worry about the dissolution of this precipitate, these dispersed precipitate at the operational temperature. So at high temperature, since this particular approach or the precipitate that are introduced by this particular approach, it is not based on the difference in the solubility at different temperature. So when you put this particular material at high temperature, you don't have to worry about the precipitate dissolving back to the base metal, as you have to take care in case of the precipitate hardened or precipitation hardened two-phase system. In case of dispersion hardened system, you don't have to worry about such dissolution of the precipitate back to the base metal. So essentially, you can create a microstructure that is similar to this using two different approaches. One is precipitation hardening and other is dispersion hardening. In precipitation hardening, because of the dependence of solubility, and this is the critical factor here, on the temperature, it is possible that the precipitate can dissolve back to the base metal, thereby not rendering the effect that it should render. Therefore, we have another alternate, that is dispersion hardening. This particle or this approach brings about the microstructure through the technique that is similar to that of the powder metallurgical techniques. So therefore, you don't have to worry about the dissolution, a significant amount of dissolution of the precipitate back to the base metal, and in addition to that, it gives you or gives us a wide range of combinations of two different phases. Now, both these phases or both these approaches, both precipitation and dispersion ardent, they give us a microstructure that is similar to that, wherein you have the precipitates or the particles that are randomly distributed in the microstructure. Now, these precipitate, our ultimate goal again here is to impede the propagation of the dislocation. Or you could say our ultimate goal again here is to reduce the amount of plastic deformation in a given particular instance during the steady state condition. So one way of doing that, as we saw, is by restricting the propagation of the dislocation. Now, irrespective of the approach you take in order to bring about or in order to establish the microstructure with dispersed particles, whatever approach that you take, be it precipitation hardening or be it dispersed hardening, our ultimate goal is for the precipitate to restrict the movement of the dislocation. So the way the precipitate restrict the movement of the dislocation depends on the interface that is formed between the precipitate and the base metal. So you have, in this condition or in this microstructure, you have a definite interface that forms between the precipitate and the base metal, which maybe it might be a grain or it might be along the grain bonding. Irrespective of it, there is an interface that is formed between the precipitate and the actual base metal, and depending on this interface between the precipitate and the base metal, the way the dislocation migration is impeded varies. So this interface between the precipitate and the matrix can be categorized into coherent, incoherent, and semi-coherent interfaces. So depending on the nature of the interface, the way this interface interacts with the dislocation varies. So the interface between precipitate and the matrix, they are of these three forms, and depending on the nature of this interface, so you have this coherent here and the incoherent and the semi-coherent. So depending on the nature of the interface, the interaction between the interface and the dislocation vary. So now the easiest way of differentiating coherence, incoherent and semi-coherent is by considering the continuity in which the atoms are arranged. So when you consider the arrangement of the atoms, if you could see a continuity in this arrangement of the atoms across the phases, then the interface is coherent in nature. So one way of distinguishing these three different interfaces are by considering the continuity in the arrangement of atoms, in the atomic arrangement across the interface. So when you consider an interface and it is possible for you to establish a continuity in this the atomic arrangement across these two different phases, then what you essentially have is a coherent interface. You have a significant amount of continuity in the arrangement of the atoms across these two different phases, then ultimately you end up having a coherent interface. If it is impossible for us, or if there is no continuity that exists between these two different phases, then you end up having the incoherent phase. So when there is a certain degree of continuity that can be discerned, you have coherent phases, coherent interface. If the continuity is completely, or it is impossible for us to discern such coherency, then you have incoherent phases. And if we are able to establish a certain amount of continuity through some defects, if we can introduce some defects, and by the introduction of the defects, if we are able to establish some continuity, then we have established a semi-coherent interface between the two phases. Now in the next lecture, we will see how these different phases interact with the dislocations and how they impede their motions. So let's see ourselves in the next lecture. Goodbye.